Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. I am your host, guiding you through the cases that have moved through the courts and reached a conclusion, but left the public divided. These are not your typical cut and dried cases. These are the ones where the facts may be clear, but the truth? Well, that's another story. Now, imagine this. You are lying in a hospital bed, putting your life in the hands of someone you've been told is one of the best. A neurosurgeon with an impressive resume and credentials. You're here to fix the pain, the weakness, the symptoms you have been battling. But when you wake up, it's worse, much worse. And in some cases, you never wake up at all. This is not a bad dream. This is the horrifying reality for dozens of patients treated, or should I say butchered, by Christopher Duntsch, a neurosurgeon now known as Dr. Death. With a trail of maimed and deceased patients in his wake, Duntsch's case is one of the most brutal and controversial examples of medical malpractice in U.S. history. Today we're diving into this chilling case. Was Duntsch simply incompetent, or was he intentionally inflicting harm? Mad or bad, guys? How did the system allow this to continue for so long? And most importantly, how can we make sense of the lives destroyed by someone sworn to do no harm? Stick with me here as we uncover the brutal facts behind the headlines and ask, who really failed these victims? The man who wielded the scalpel, or the system that enabled him? To understand the horror that unfolded in Christopher Duntsch's operating rooms, we need to start with the man himself. On paper, he seemed like the perfect doctor. Duntsch earned both his MD and PhD from the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, completing rigorous training in neurosurgery and spinal surgery. He was charismatic, intelligent, and outwardly confident, qualities that made him seem trustworthy. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Colleagues from his training years described Duntsch as erratic and overconfident. Despite being in one of the most demanding fields in medicine, he reportedly partied excessively, using drugs, and alienated those around him. But these warning signs were overlooked, and Duntsch began his career with glowing credentials and little scrutiny. When he started practicing in Dallas, patients believed they were in the hands of an expert. They trusted him to relieve their pain, restore their mobility, and in some cases, save their lives. Instead, many left the operating room permanently disabled, or worse, dead. The real question is, how does someone like this slip through the cracks? How does a man with a scalpel in one hand and a history of recklessness in the other end up being trusted with people's lives? Was Duntsch simply unqualified, or was he something far worse? A predator hiding behind a medical license? The true horror of Christopher Duntsch's story lies not just in his actions, but in the lives he destroyed. His patients came to him for help, trusting his credentials, his charm, and the system that certified him. What they got was something out of a nightmare, though. Take Kelly Martin, a 55-year-old woman seeking relief from chronic back pain. She was told that Duntsch could perform a routine surgery to fix her issues. Instead, Kelly died on the operating table after Duntsch severed an artery and failed to repair it. Her death was completely preventable. Then there's Jerry Summers, Duntsch's best friend. Jerry underwent a cervical fusion surgery performed by Duntsch. What was supposed to improve his quality of life left him a quadriplegic. He was unable to move or speak clearly after this. Shockingly, Summers defended Duntsch even after the catastrophic outcome, a testament to the doctor's manipulative hold over people and how believable he was. And these were not isolated incidents, okay? Patient after patient reported catastrophic outcomes: nerve damage, paralysis, chronic pain, and even death. By the time Duntsch was stopped, over 30 people had been permanently harmed or killed under his care. But how was he allowed to continue operating for so long? The answer lies in the failures of the healthcare system. Hospitals that received complaints about Duntsch often opted to quietly let him go rather than report him. Didn't want that to, reflect on the hospital. Fear of lawsuits, bad publicity. These things kept his incompetence under wraps. So how does that make you feel? Instead of being stripped of his license, this guy simply moved from one hospital to another, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Allowed by a system, totally comfortable with himself. To the world, everything's fine here. I mean, this isn't just a story about a man with a scalpel, okay? This is about a system that enabled this guy with a scalpel. Was Duntsch an incompetent surgeon blinded by his own ego? Or was he something darker? A man who knew exactly what he was doing and continued anyway. And when the system protects the predator instead of the patient, who is really to blame? As the cases against Christopher Duntsch mounted, one chilling question emerged. Was this man simply incompetent? Was there something far more sinister at play here? Was Duntsch mad, mentally unstable, and unaware of the damage he was causing? Or was he bad, a calculated predator, exploiting his position for reasons only he could understand? For many, the evidence pointed to the latter. Duntsch wasn't a new surgeon learning from his mistakes. His errors were catastrophic and repeated, cutting arteries, severing nerves, leaving surgical tools inside of patients. But what made these mistakes even far more horrifying was his response. Instead of acknowledging his failures, Duntsch doubled down, blaming the hospitals, the nurses, and even the patients themselves. Then came the emails. In one now famous message to a colleague, Duntsch declared, "I am ready to become a cold-blooded killer." Now, whether this was a figure of speech or a shocking admission, maybe something unconscious, it revealed a disturbing mindset. How could someone who claimed to be a healer even write such words? Yet some argued that Duntsch's behavior was a result of untreated mental illness, maybe substance abuse. His colleagues reported signs of drug use during surgeries and erratic, impulsive decisions. Was his recklessness a symptom of addiction clouding his judgment, or was this a part of a pattern of deliberate harm? The truth might be somewhere in between. Duntsch was clearly a man who thrived on power, wielding the scalpel not to heal, but to control. Whether driven by ego, malice, or instability, the result was the same: lives destroyed and trust shattered. This is what makes the mad or bad question so haunting here. If Duntsch was mad, the system failed to recognize and remove him. If he was bad, the system enabled his cruelty for far too long. And either way, the victims were the ones who paid the ultimate price. For years, Christopher Duntsch continued to operate, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. So how was he finally stopped? The turning point came when Robert Henderson, a Dallas spine surgeon, operated on one of Duntsch's former patients. What Henderson found shocked him: shoddy work, misplaced hardware, and catastrophic damage. It was clear this was not just a bad day in the OR, it was something far worse. And Henderson sounded the alarm, alerting medical boards and colleagues about Duntsch's dangerous incompetence. Dr. Randall Kirby, another surgeon who witnessed Duntsch's work firsthand, became equally determined to stop him. He and Henderson compiled evidence, reached out to victims, and pushed for legal action. And together they built a case that could not be ignored, exposing the systemic failures that allowed Duntsch to continue practicing. In 2013, after years of harm, Duntsch's medical license was finally revoked. But for many, this was not enough. The victims demanded accountability beyond a revoked license. Their persistence, combined with the efforts of Henderson and Kirby, led prosecutors to pursue criminal charges. This shows you that pressure can make a difference, can sometimes help to try to right a wrong. Duntsch was ultimately charged with aggravated assault and injury to an elderly person. This made him one of the first surgeons in U.S. history to face criminal prosecution for medical malpractice, if you can believe that. And in 2017, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, if you can believe that. This thing got very serious very quickly. And I think for a lot of us, we feel as though the medical profession has always been held accountable. So this is probably very interesting for a lot of you to find out that this is the first one. But the question remains, why did it take so long for this guy? I mean, how many lives could have been saved if hospitals and medical boards and peers would have acted sooner? The fact that Duntsch was allowed to operate for years, despite very clear signs of incompetence or worse, raises brutal questions about the priorities of the system that's meant to protect patients. They're not prioritizing that, or weren't here, prioritizing themselves instead. I mean, in the end, Duntsch was stopped not by the institutions tasked with oversight here, but by individuals who refused to stay silent. And that's what I mean by the pressure. Sometimes the public cannot just rely on these systems that have been put in place, even if they have big words like oversight. Let's now take a closer look at the man himself, Christopher Duntsch. How did he get here? Who is this guy? Well, his career began, like many others in the medical field, with promise and potential. Who doesn't want to hear that their son or friend is going to be a doctor? You know, sounds awesome. And after earning both an MD and a PhD, he completed a prestigious neurosurgery residency. And then he launched his practice in Dallas. This sounds wonderful. On paper, he was an ideal candidate for patients seeking spinal surgeries. Highly educated, ambitious, confident. But beneath the surface, cracks were already showing. Duntsch's training period was marked by troubling behavior. Colleagues reported that he often appeared distracted, overconfident, even reckless. There were whispers about drug use and lack of accountability, but these concerns never escalated to formal action. And so much of the time when we see someone with promise or all these other good things, we do hesitate to report stuff like this. But when this is a medical professional who is going to be tasked with other people's lives, how do we rationalize applying that in a case like this? It's a very difficult question. It happens a lot. I mean, once this guy began practicing, these problems, though, became impossible to ignore, even though they had been overlooked or forgiven in the past. Patients trusted Duntsch with their health, their mobility, their lives. And instead they found themselves maimed or worse. Among his earliest catastrophic errors was a surgery that left a patient permanently disabled. And it was the first of many, but even then, no decisive action was taken. Hospitals began receiving complaints, but instead of confronting the issue, many chose a quieter route, allowing Duntsch to resign and move on to another facility. Just go quietly, we won't say anything, and go practice over there. Their patients are less important than ours, and certainly their image is less important than ours. So, yeah, just move on. I mean, that's terrible. That is your hospital, maybe. The decision to protect their reputations came at a cost, however, because more lives were destroyed. And the real tragedy lies in the timeline. From the first known case of catastrophic injury to the revocation of his medical license, nearly 2 years had passed, and during that time, Duntsch performed dozens of surgeries with disastrous results. Patients entered the operating room hopeful for a better life, only to leave it in unimaginable pain, permanently disabled or dead. What makes this timeline so disturbing isn't just the damage caused by Duntsch, though. It's the lack of urgency from the system designed to stop him. It's so important here as well. This was not a single oversight. This was a systemic failure, one that prioritized reputations and profit over the lives of the patients it claimed to protect. For the patients who walked into Christopher Duntsch's operating room, the promises were always the same: relief and recovery and a chance at a better life. Sounds like what we want when we go to the doctor. But what they received was far from any of that. One of the earliest tragedies was Kelly Martin, 55-year-old woman seeking routine spinal surgery. What should have been a straightforward procedure turned deadly when Duntsch severed a major artery. Martin began bleeding profusely on the table, and then instead of addressing the issue, Duntsch ignored it, and she died hours later, leaving her family completely devastated. Then there was Floella Brown, a 63-year-old woman who trusted Duntsch to alleviate her chronic pain. During surgery, Duntsch cut into her vertebral artery, causing a massive stroke. Brown was left brain dead and later taken off life support. Her death, like Martin's, was entirely preventable. Perhaps the most haunting case, though, was Jerry Summers, because this was Duntsch's childhood friend. Summers underwent surgery to address minor neck pain, and instead, Duntsch botches the operation, and he botches it so severely that his friend Summers becomes a quadriplegic. Can you believe this? Can you imagine if this were you? Despite this, though, Summers continues to defend Duntsch, and he continues to defend him for years. And this showcases the manipulative power that Duntsch had over people. I mean, these cases were not anomalies. These were patterns. Over 30 patients suffered life-altering injuries or even death under Duntsch's care. Victims were left paralyzed, unable to work, or enduring unbearable pain. Some required multiple corrective surgeries just to try to undo the damage Duntsch caused. The sheer number of victims raises an unsettling question. How could this go on for so long? People want to know because they want to feel like someone's looking out for them. If this can go on for so long, how good do you feel about going to your next appointment? Because it's clear here, hospitals dismissed complaints. Peers hesitated to report this man, and patients trusted the system to protect them. And instead they became statistics in one of the most horrifying medical malpractice cases in U.S. history. For every patient who walked into Duntsch's operating room, the outcome wasn't just a tragedy, it was a betrayal. And yet it wasn't just Duntsch who betrayed them. It was the system that allowed him to keep operating, even as the evidence against him mounted. Christopher Duntsch's reign of medical terror finally began to unravel when fellow surgeons started to take action. As I mentioned, Dr. Robert Henderson, a seasoned spine surgeon in Dallas, operated on a patient who had been treated by Duntsch. What he found left him stunned. He found misplaced screws, nerve damage, and a complete disregard for basic surgical principles. Henderson wasn't alone in his concerns. Dr. Randall Kirby, a general surgeon who had worked with Duntsch, had already witnessed his incompetence firsthand. After assisting in one of Duntsch's surgeries, Kirby described the experience as observing a crazed maniac trying to operate. He began documenting every case he could find, building a case against Duntsch. Despite their efforts, the process was agonizingly slow. You had the hospitals, but they were fearful of lawsuits and negative publicity. They were reluctant to report Duntsch's malpractice. That should shock you and upset anyone who has anything to do with hospitals at this moment. Instead, the hospitals just allowed him to quietly resign, and they just passed the problem on to the next facility. Could be your facility. The Texas Medical Board, burdened by bureaucracy, took years to act. That's terrible. Isn't this their job? The turning point came when Henderson and Kirby escalated their efforts. Individuals who are taking this on themselves. They compiled detailed reports. They reached out to patients. They pressured the medical board to intervene. They were heroes because their persistence paid off. And in 2013, Duntsch's medical license was finally revoked. He finally could not practice. This took individuals pushing the point. We cannot always rely on what has been set forth in front of us. Just because it is a system that has been put in place, a process that everyone signed off on, it does not mean it's right for every situation. And if it's wrong, we need to push. And that's what happened here, and that's what saved the day. Saved the day, but for many it was too late. Over 30 patients had already suffered devastating injuries or death. Families were shattered. Victims faced lifelong consequences. The system that was supposed to protect them had failed at every level. And if it took individuals and 30 patients to get there, what if these two individuals, Henderson and Kirby, were not there? How many patients were going to suffer in the future that the system didn't seem to really care about? Well, what followed was unprecedented. The Dallas County District Attorney's Office took the rare step of pursuing criminal charges against Duntsch. This marked one of the first times a surgeon was prosecuted for malpractice. And again, let's point out, the system did not push it to this point. The system we have put in place to secure and keep ourselves safe. No, it was individuals working to fight a system to finally do their job. At the end of the day, this was not just about incompetence. This was about holding someone accountable for what could only be described as criminal negligence. Duntsch's license was gone, but the damage he caused would last forever. And the question remained, was he merely reckless? Was he deliberately causing harm? And why? Did it take the actions of a few brave individuals to stop him when the evidence was overwhelming and we put our trust and we create a system to do this for us? And then we have to do it ourselves? Well, that's what got it done. Christopher Duntsch's criminal trial was a landmark case when it finally happened. It marked one of the first times, as I said, a doctor faced prosecution for medical malpractice. And the charges against him were severe. 5 counts of aggravated assault, 1 count of injury to an elderly person. These charges stemmed from just a fraction of his victims. And just remember that system, the medical system put in place to help protect you, all those hospitals, they didn't feel like charges like this were severe enough to protect you. And it was just a fraction. But the prosecutors, they had to focus on cases with the clearest evidence to get this conviction. After all, they were finally there. One of the pivotal cases presented at trial was that of Mary Ufrid, a 74-year-old woman who went into surgery hoping to regain mobility at 74. But now she was left permanently disabled. During her operation, Duntsch left surgical hardware lodged in her muscles and severed critical nerves. This rendered her unable to walk. Unable to walk, people. This case became the cornerstone of the prosecution's argument, demonstrating both Duntsch's incompetence and his callous disregard for patient safety. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Medical records, expert testimony, and even his own emails painted a damning picture. One email in particular sent chills through the courtroom. Duntsch referred to himself as a cold-blooded killer. Remember that remark? He claimed he was ready to leave a legacy in that email. Now, whether these words were a twisted bow story, sign of mental instability, they underscored the danger he posed. And as I mentioned earlier, what kind of medical professional puts that in an email or says that at all? After weeks of testimony, the jury took less than an hour to convict Duntsch, and in 2017 he was sentenced to life in prison for his actions. The sentence was not just about punishment, this was about setting a precedent. For the first time, a surgeon had been held criminally responsible for the devastation they caused, sending a clear message that the operating room is not above the law. This was an important one. But for the victims and their families, the trial did bring mixed emotions. While there was relief that Duntsch could no longer harm anyone else, there was also anger and grief. The system had allowed him to operate unchecked for years, and no verdict could undo the damage caused. Duntsch's case remains a chilling reminder of what happens when trust is placed in the wrong hands. It wasn't just a failure of one man here, okay? This was the failure of an entire system. The people trusted the surgeon. They trusted the hospital who put the surgeon there. They trusted the medical board to watch the hospitals and the surgeons to help keep them safe. Failed at every level. The scars were both physical and emotional, and for the victims, they're never going to fully heal. The prosecution's case against Christopher Duntsch was straightforward, but it was devastating. They argued that Duntsch was not just incompetent, he was criminally negligent, fully aware of the harm he was causing, and choosing to continue anyway. To build this case, prosecutors relied on overwhelming evidence, botched surgeries, catastrophic injuries, and testimonies from victims and medical experts. They highlighted Duntsch's reckless behavior in the operating room, where he ignored standard procedures and caused preventable damage. His email, in which he referred to himself as a cold-blooded killer, was a focal point, suggesting malice rather than just ignorance. The prosecution also emphasized the sheer scale of harm. Over 30 patients, permanently injured or killed. They painted a picture of a man who used his credentials to exploit a system that allowed him to keep practicing, even when his incompetence was glaringly obvious. Their argument was clear. Christopher Duntsch wasn't just dangerous, he was a predator, hiding behind a medical license. And now let's look at the defense. What did they have to say? Well, they argued that Christopher Duntsch was not malicious. No, he was mentally unstable and unfit to practice medicine. They claimed his actions were the result of untreated substance abuse and psychological issues, not intentional harm. The defense pointed to Duntsch's erratic behavior and poor decision-making as signs of a man in crisis rather than a calculated predator. They also argued that the hospitals and medical boards, they bore some responsibility for allowing him to continue to practice, suggesting that systemic failures enabled the harm more than any deliberate intent on Duntsch's part. Ultimately, the defense framed Duntsch as a flawed individual who lacked the support and oversight necessary to prevent tragedy. And while this argument highlighted systemic issues, it failed to absolve him of the direct harm he caused. And if you look at even this defense argument, there's not much they can do with it here. Clearly, he is disturbed, Mr. Duntsch, in some way. But where was the system that is supposed to notice things like this and protect us while we go into surgery, allowing surgeons to completely shut down our bodies? There's nothing we can do about it. That's what the system allowed to happen here. Mentally disturbed or not, where were they? Each side has a shot here. What's interesting, though, is that the defense, They can't only just defend their client. They do need to divert. And it's just something to notice here. This case remains one of the most chilling and divisive in modern medical history. There's a lot involved. On one hand, his life sentence marked a landmark moment. Rarely are surgeons prosecuted and convicted for malpractice. On the other, it highlighted systemic failures that allowed him to destroy so many lives before he was stopped. Critics argue that Duntsch's conviction does not address the bigger issue here: how hospitals and medical boards and peers failed to react. Why aren't complaints investigated sooner? These are human lives. Why was he allowed to resign quietly from hospitals that we all trust instead of being reported? These questions haunt a system that seemed more concerned with protecting reputations than protecting patients. Public opinion is divided because some see Duntsch as a monster who knew exactly what he was doing, and he used his position to harm instead of heal. But others argue he was mentally unwell, a victim of his own arrogance and substance abuse, and the system should have seen this and helped this man, removed him, maybe gotten him some care. What's undeniable is the damage he caused, though. Regardless of anything else, dozens of lives have been destroyed, families shattered, and an entire community left questioning how trust in the medical system could be so catastrophically misplaced. Was justice served with Duntsch's life sentence? Or was even that just merely a Band-Aid on a deeper wound within the system? Christopher Duntsch's story isn't just about a surgeon gone wrong. It's about how deeply we place our trust in people and systems, often without questioning. His case forces us to confront the chilling reality that someone with his history and behavior was flat out allowed to operate on patients for a long time, destroying lives, and institutions just stood by. In today's world, everything can be a cover-up, and we all have the responsibility of doing our own due diligence to dig deeper. You cannot believe what you read and see and hear and are told. Believe me, you need to go find out for yourself. That's how it is. That's how the world today is. Then you have Duntsch. Think about his actions, okay? Over 30 patients permanently injured or killed. Who was this guy? Was this the work of a man blinded by incompetence and ego? Or was there something darker at play? Could his reckless behavior and chilling email, calling himself a cold-blooded killer, be dismissed as the ramblings of an unstable mind? Or did this guy mean every word of it? And think about the system that allowed him to continue. The hospitals quietly letting him move on. Medical boards delaying action. Because this wasn't just one man's failure, this was a systemic collapse. Duntsch's case shows us what happens when reputations and profits and bureaucracy are prioritized over human lives. It's still happening today, all around us. With this case now, I leave this to you. Do you believe Christopher Duntsch was mad? Was he bad? Was he both? Should we place all the blame on him? Do we need to hold the entire medical system accountable for enabling his destruction? These are hard questions that we have to ask ourselves, and it's not just about this case, but about the trust we place in the hands of those with power. Because if it happened once, what's to stop it from happening again? Thank you for joining me in True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. Stay safe out there. Stay curious. Ask the difficult questions. And until next time, this is Alexis Knight.